World War I killed 17 million people. That number gets repeated so often it has almost lost its weight. 17 million. More than the entire population of the Netherlands. More than every man, woman, and child in New York City. Twice over. And while some of those deaths came from unstoppable weapons, from disease, from the sheer industrial scale of modern warfare, a significant portion of them came from something far simpler. They came from orders. Orders given by men with maps and confidence, and a complete failure to understand what was in front of them. These weren't unlucky commanders. They weren't facing forces beyond their capacity to counter. They were given armies, professional soldiers, the resources of entire empires, and they spent them. These are the 7 worst generals of the First World War, ranked by the scale of their failures, the preventability of their disasters, and the armies they sent to die for nothing. Starting with number 7, John French was the first commander of the British Expeditionary Force, the senior British general on the Western Front from the opening of the war in August 1914 through the end of 1915. In the beginning, his task was simply to survive. Through Mons, through the retreat to the Marne, through the grinding race to the sea, French kept his army in the field. But by 1915, survival was not enough. The Western Front had solidified into trenches, and the question was no longer how to hold on. The question was how to break through. The Battle of Loos, September 1915, was supposed to be that breakthrough. General Douglas Haig's forces attacked the German lines near the French-Belgian border, and in the opening hours, something rare happened on the Western Front. A genuine gap opened. British troops had pierced the German line. The door, briefly, was cracked. What was needed were reserves, fresh troops ready to pour through the gap before the Germans could seal it. French had those reserves. He had kept them back, 16 miles behind the front, under his direct command. The problem was that 16 miles in 1915 might as well have been a different country. The reserves began marching. They marched through the night. By the time they reached the front, the Germans had identified the breach, rushed reinforcements forward, and the door had closed. British casualties at Loos reached approximately 60,000. French was sacked in December 1915. Some historians have argued that Douglas Haig, who would replace French, deliberately reported the reserve delay to Lord Kitchener to accelerate his rival's removal. That question remains contested. What is not contested is the result. The window existed. The reserves were not there. 60,000 British soldiers paid for that gap. Number 6 takes us east, far to the east, in August 1914, where Russia launched an invasion of East Prussia designed to pull German forces away from France at the critical moment of the war's opening. The plan required 2 Russian armies to converge on German forces from different directions. General Rennenkampf's First Army driving in from the northeast, General Alexander Samsonov's Second Army pressing up from the south. Between them, they would trap and crush the Germans. The plan had one catastrophic flaw. The 2 armies had no reliable communication with each other, and the radio transmissions they did send were being broadcast completely unencrypted. The German commanders, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, didn't just know that Samsonov was coming. They knew his route of march, his order of battle, the positions of his corps, the pace of his advance. Samsonov pushed his Second Army deeper into East Prussia. Supply lines stretched. The terrain, threaded with the Masurian lakes and dense forest corridors, funneled his forces into predictable approach routes. From the west and from the east, German forces moved by rail, the efficient German rail network giving them a speed the Russians could not match on foot, and began to curve around the flanks of Samsonov's advancing army. Between August 26th and 30th, 1914, the trap closed at Tannenberg. The Russian Second Army was surrounded, cut off, and destroyed. Approximately 92,000 Russian soldiers were captured. Around 30,000 were killed. 500 artillery pieces were taken. It was one of the most complete encirclements in modern military history. Some historians note that the role of the intercepted signals has occasionally been overstated in popular accounts, that German repositioning had begun before the intercepts fully confirmed the picture. But the core failure is unchanged. Samsonov rode into the collapsing pocket himself, understood what had happened, and on August 30th, somewhere in the forests of East Prussia, took his own life. Number 5 is Franz Conrad von Hötzendorf, Chief of Staff of the Austro-Hungarian Army from 1906 through 1917, a man who found a way to lose 2 wars simultaneously before the first autumn was over. Austria-Hungary in 1914 faced 2 immediate enemies, Serbia to the south, Russia to the north and east. Conrad planned to open offensives against both. The problem was arithmetic. The army did not have enough forces to fully prosecute 2 campaigns at once. Conrad's solution was the B-Staffel, the mobile reserve, a large body of troops that would first reinforce the Serbian campaign, then transfer north to Galicia once the Serbian front stabilized. It did not work. The B-Staffel was loaded onto trains heading south toward Serbia. Then Russia mobilized faster than expected, and those troops were pulled off the trains and redirected north to Galicia. They arrived exhausted. The timetable was destroyed. Neither front received the forces Conrad had promised. In September 1914, at Lemberg in Galicia, the Austro-Hungarian army was decisively beaten by Russia. Casualties reached approximately 400,000. In the same period, the Serbian campaign stalled and failed to produce the quick victory Conrad had assumed. Both fronts were compromised before the war was 3 months old, the direct consequence of a plan that had committed the same men to 2 different places at the same time. Conrad had pushed for preemptive military action against Serbia, Russia, and even Italy in the years before 1914. The aggressive instincts that started the war set the conditions for his own disasters inside it. Number 4. Ian Hamilton, commander of Allied forces at Gallipoli in 1915, and a general for whom the word hesitation might as well have been a professional identity. The Gallipoli campaign carried a genuine strategic logic. Force open the Dardanelles, threaten Constantinople, knock the Ottoman Empire from the war, and open a supply route to Russia. The execution was a different matter. On April 25, 1915, Allied forces came ashore at multiple points along the Gallipoli Peninsula. At Anzac Cove, Australian and New Zealand troops landed in the pre-dawn darkness below steep, tangled ridgelines. There was a window in those early hours, not long, but real, when those heights were not yet fully defended. That window closed when a young Ottoman officer named Mustafa Kemal grasped the situation faster than Hamilton did and rushed Turkish reserves to the ridgeline. Hamilton, commanding from a ship offshore, was too far from the pace of events to shape them. 4 months later came the Suvla Bay landings, a fresh attempt to break the deadlock. A new corps came ashore almost without opposition. The Anafarta Hills above the landing zone were, for approximately 24 to 36 hours, effectively undefended. Officers reported the opportunity. The corps commander did not advance. Hamilton did not override him, not for a day, not during the critical window when those hills might have transformed the campaign. By the time movement was finally ordered, Turkish reinforcements had arrived and the heights were fortified. Total Allied casualties at Gallipoli reached approximately 250,000. The peninsula was evacuated in December 1915 and January 1916. The evacuation itself conducted with more skill than any offensive the campaign had managed. Hamilton was sacked in October 1915. He lived until 1947 and wrote his memoirs. Number 3 is Luigi Cadorna, Chief of Staff of the Italian Army, who holds a distinction that is almost impossible to comprehend. He launched 11 separate offensive battles against the same Austrian defensive position on the same river, and every single one of them failed. The Isonzo, a river running through a narrow rocky valley on Italy's northeastern frontier, became the central axis of Italy's war from June 1915 onward. The terrain was brutal. Steep limestone ridges, limited approach routes, almost no room for flanking maneuver. The Austrians fortified their positions after the first battle, after the second, after the third. By the 4th, 5th, and 6th Isonzo offensives, those defenses were among the most formidable on any front in the war. Cadorna's answer was to attack them again. Each offensive followed the same pattern: an artillery bombardment, infantry advancing over the same rocky ground toward the same prepared positions, Austrian machine guns, and pre-registered artillery on the heights. Approximately 300,000 Italian soldiers died across the 11 battles. Austria-Hungary held the line throughout. When his offensives failed, Cadorna sacked his subordinates. He dismissed over 200 generals during the war. Blame in his army always traveled downward. The 12th battle arrived in October 1917, but this time it was the Austrians attacking, supported by German stormtrooper units using new infiltration tactics, bypassing strongpoints, driving deep into rear areas, collapsing command structures rather than grinding through front lines. The Italian position at Caporetto broke catastrophically. 300,000 Italian soldiers were taken prisoner. Cadorna, who had spent 2 years blaming the men below him for failures that were structural, was finally dismissed. Number 2 requires a different kind of reckoning because Erich von Falkenhayn, German Chief of Staff from September 1914 through August 1916, did not fail through incompetence or hesitation. He failed through design. In a memorandum sent to Kaiser Wilhelm II in late 1915, traditionally known as the Christmas Memorandum, though its precise authenticity has been questioned by historian Holger Afflerbach, who has argued it may have been reconstructed or revised after the war, Falkenhayn described his plan for 1916. France, he argued, was near breaking. The key was to find a position she could not abandon for reasons of national prestige and military necessity. Attack it not to capture it, but to force France to pour her reserves into its defense. The objective was not territory. The objective was French soldiers. The position Falkenhayn chose was Verdun, an ancient fortress city in northeastern France that carried enormous symbolic weight. The German offensive began on February 21, 1916. France did exactly what Falkenhayn had anticipated. She committed her reserves. The Voie Sacrée, the single main road running south from Bar-le-Duc into the city, became the lifeline of the French war effort, with trucks rolling day and night to keep the garrison supplied and reinforced. But the plan contained a fatal assumption. It required Germany to kill French soldiers faster than she absorbed casualties herself. That was wrong. French defensive artillery in the hills around Verdun was formidable. French commanders rotated their divisions through the battle regularly, spreading the cost across the army, rather than grinding the same units into the ground. German units, attacking repeatedly over the same ground, bled at nearly the same rate as the defenders. And then, in July 1916, the British and French launched a major offensive along the Somme River, designed partly to relieve the pressure on Verdun. Now Germany was fighting 2 attritional campaigns simultaneously on 2 different stretches of the Western Front. That was the exact scenario Falkenhayn's strategy had been designed to prevent. Combined casualties at Verdun by the end of 1916 reached approximately 700,000, around 377,000 French, around 337,000 German, with no meaningful change in the front line. Falkenhayn was dismissed in August 1916. The meat grinder he had designed had consumed both sides equally, which brings us to number 1. On July 1st, 1916, the British Army suffered the worst single day of casualties in its entire history. 57,470 men killed, wounded, or missing. 19,240 dead in a single morning. Douglas Haig was Commander-in-Chief of the British Expeditionary Force from December 1915 through the end of the war. The Battle of the Somme was his offensive. The opening bombardment had lasted 7 days and was supposed to have destroyed the German wire, collapsed the German dugouts, and left the defending infantry too shattered to resist. British soldiers were told they could walk across no man's land. What they found instead were German deep bunkers that had survived the bombardment intact, wire uncut across large sections of the front, and machine gun crews who had waited underground for the guns to stop and then climbed back to their positions. The British infantry advanced in waves, at walking pace, across open ground, into those guns. The offensive continued for 141 days. The maximum advance by November 18th, when it ended, was approximately 6 miles. Total British casualties reached around 420,000. French losses were approximately 200,000. German casualties ranged from 465,000 to 500,000 by most estimates. The following year, Haig launched the Third Battle of Ypres across the waterlogged, shell-churned ground of the Belgian salient. The preliminary bombardment had destroyed the drainage system of a landscape already composed of clay and swamp. The offensive ground forward through the mud for 3.5 months, capturing the ruined village of Passchendaele in November 1917, then losing it back to the Germans the following spring. British casualties were approximately 275,000 for a gain of roughly 5 miles. The debate over Haig's record has never fully closed. Revisionist historians, including John Terrain and Gary Sheffield, have argued seriously that Haig was fighting within real industrial constraints, that the BEF developed genuine combined arms capability over the course of the war, and that the 100 Days Offensive of 1918, which broke the German army and ended the conflict, was the product of that institutional growth. These are serious arguments, and they deserve acknowledgement. But the charge is not that Haig was a uniquely evil man, or that victory was simple to achieve. The charge is that the lessons available elsewhere on the Western Front, better artillery coordination, infantry and tank cooperation, bite and hold methods, were not consistently applied. That soldiers were ordered against positions in ways that senior commanders had already seen fail in similar form before. That on the morning of July 1st, 1916, the British Army walked into machine guns that 7 days of artillery had not silenced, because the assumptions behind the plan had not been checked against the evidence already sitting in front of them. 7 men, 7 armies, 7 catastrophes of different shapes. French couldn't read a moment. Samsonov walked into a trap he helped to build. Conrad tried to fight 2 wars with 1 army. Hamilton watched his opportunities from a ship. Cadorna attacked the same wall 11 times and sacked the men below him each time it held. Falkenhayn designed a killing machine and discovered it couldn't tell the difference between sides. And Haig sent his men forward and kept sending them, when the evidence of what was waiting for them was already there. What connects them is not stupidity. Several were intelligent men with real military credentials. What connects them is that none of them paid the price for the decisions they made. The men who paid it are carved into stone across France, Belgium, Italy, Turkey, and Russia. At the Thiepval Memorial in the Somme Valley, 72,000 names are inscribed. 72,000 British and South African soldiers who died on the Somme and whose bodies were never identified or found. The memorial was dedicated in 1932. It is still standing. 17 million people. Not inevitable. Ordered.